What happens when a seemingly perfect relationship unravels in the most unexpected way, revealing a family's secrets and a partner's true nature? My name is Claire B. Chat and I'm 48 years old. I've always been dedicated to my career, cherishing my independence and never feeling the need for a relationship. My days were filled with hobbies like reading and watching movies, and I never once felt the void that others feared in their single lives. But everything changed one April afternoon when a business associate, Per Adams, proposed an introduction. "Miss Bat, I'd like to introduce you to someone. What do you think?" Passed one day. Initially hesitant, I eventually gave in to his persistence and agreed to meet his son, Chad. We were the same age, and although Chad had come close to marriage a few times, he had always remained single. His charm was undeniable, polite, respectful, and kind. I was intrigued, thinking that maybe this could work. After a few meetings, I suggested we start dating. Both Chad and his father were pleased, and everything seemed to move along smoothly. But of course, perfection never lasts. About 5 weeks into our relationship, Chad and I were on our third date. He smiled and remarked, "We're already like a couple, aren't we?" It seemed like a simple, sweet comment. He had traded his usual formal attire for a relaxed jacket, and I had opted for casual pants. Though older, we felt young again, enjoying each other's company. But then something felt off. Chad began making comments that seemed condescending. At one point, he took me to an upscale restaurant and casually remarked, "You probably don't get to visit places like this often, right? It must be unusual for you." I was taken aback. Was he implying I didn't belong in such settings? I tried to brush it off, but throughout the evening, more subtle remarks chipped away at my confidence. It felt like he was subtly putting me down, implying I wasn't on his level. At first, I dismissed it, thinking I was overreacting, but deep down I started questioning his intentions. As the weeks passed, the signs became clearer. His disregard for my thoughts and constant comparisons to his world began to erode the excitement I had initially felt. Then came the breaking point, the moment I realized how much I had overlooked in the name of convenience. It was at a family gathering, my first time meeting Chad's parents. Wanting to make a good impression, I carefully selected my outfit and styled my hair. But as I walked in to greet them, Chad's mother, Barb, greeted me with a loud, mocking laugh before splashing champagne in my face. The shock of the cold liquid was nothing compared to the humiliation I felt. Instead of being concerned, Chad laughed along with his mother. I stood there, stunned, realizing that all my efforts to ensure our relationship worked were meaningless. I had been reduced to a joke in their eyes. Chad's laughter rang in my ears, and at that moment, I finally saw the depth of his loyalty to his mother, and how little I meant to him. The words escaped my mouth before I could stop them. "I'll terminate our contract with your company." "What?" Chad and Barb exclaimed in disbelief, their faces frozen in shock. They had no idea how everything had just shifted, how their disregard had pushed me to my breaking point. Before they could respond further, Chad's father, Mr. Adams, appeared, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Adams," I addressed him calmly but with firm resolve, "you mentioned before that you plan to retire soon and hand over your duties to your son. Under these circumstances, it seems only reasonable to reconsider how much trust we can place in your future leadership. Your son's actions, his complete disregard for me, show me that he's not someone I can rely on." The room fell silent, my words hanging in the air, heavy with finality. After speaking, I turned and walked away, leaving their stunned faces behind. I had done what I needed to do for my own peace of mind. They needed to face the consequences of their actions, and I wasn't going to be the one to save them. Looking back, I knew I had made the right choice. In trying to please others, I had neglected the one person who mattered most: myself. My years of independence and hard-earned career had shaped who I was, and I refused to let anyone, especially Chad and his overbearing family, take that away from me. As I walked out of that house, I left behind the expectations, the lies, and the manipulation. I was free, and I had no intention of ever returning to that world. My mom said, "You might be marrying me for money." Without thinking, I reacted instinctively. The word mom echoed in my ears and I unintentionally repeated it. Referring to one's mother as mom at nearly 50 was unusual, hinting at something peculiar about his upbringing. As our date drew to a close, Chad drove me home. Just as I was about to step out of the car, he grabbed my hand to stop me. "Miss Bat, even though I am who I am, would you marry me? Even if not immediately, being engaged is fine. Your fiancé can wait as long as it takes." His sudden proposal caught me off guard, but soon a sense of joy replaced my surprise. There were certainly concerns about Chad, but his courtship brought genuine happiness. I considered that the flaws he had could be worked on after marriage, that I could nurture him into a loving husband. 3 months had passed since we met, and I felt it was time to take the next step in our relationship. With teary eyes, I spoke. "Let's grow together, complementing each other. We both have flaws and differences, but we can work through them." Emotions surged as I envisioned our future. However, the moment I agreed to move forward, Chad revealed a side of himself that I hadn't fully seen before. "Let's start preparing for married life. First, you should quit your job, take care of the home, and learn household chores from my mom," he suggested with a smile. The joy I had felt moments ago vanished instantly, replaced by rising anger. I stood my ground, my voice firm. "Don't be so presumptuous. If that's your attitude, then marriage is off the table. Goodbye, Chad." Stunned into silence, he could only watch as I got out of the car and walked away. Though I decided to distance myself, I reluctantly agreed to meet him after receiving a message over the weekend, insisting that we talk. The weekend arrived quickly and Chad was already waiting at our meeting spot. As I approached, he immediately stood up and apologized. "I'm really sorry about last time. My friends told me I was being too controlling. I took their advice too seriously. They even scolded me for acting that way." His energy seemed deflated, and though disappointment still lingered, his words softened my frustration. I was tempted to click my tongue in irritation, but ultimately came to terms with it. Chad was straightforward, sometimes too much so. He often struggled to distinguish between jokes and serious matters. Easily influenced and somewhat indecisive, he wasn't perfect. But then again, who was? "Just remember, we're getting engaged after all," I said with a wry smile. Hearing that, Chad's face immediately brightened. A month passed in a whirlwind of emotions, and the time had come to meet each other's families to announce our engagement. The first visit was to Chad's family home. Though I had a professional relationship with Mr. Adams, this was my first time at their house and I felt nervous. Chad, as always, was kind and gentle, but something about him seemed off that morning. I assumed he was just anxious, but there was more to it. About my mom," he hesitated. I braced myself, prepared for the usual tension between a daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. However, I had only heard good things about his mother. A hard-working, kind woman. I believed that if I spoke honestly, she would understand. I was wrong. The moment I stepped into the room to greet her, a sudden splash of liquid hit my face. My eyes stung, an overpowering scent filled my nose, and I coughed uncontrollably. Panic set in as I tried to process what had just happened. "How about that, you poor thing?" a mocking voice sneered. "I've rid you of that poor smell. You should be grateful." My face burned as realization dawned. She had thrown champagne at me. Confused and in shock, I struggled to understand why I was being treated this way. "What are you doing, Barb?" Mr. Adams exclaimed, his voice filled with disbelief. It was then that everything clicked. Chad's mother, Barb, had thrown the champagne and the mocking voice had come from her. His dismissive attitude toward my financial status, his casual remarks about me being poor, suddenly made sense. It wasn't just him. It was his upbringing, his mother's mindset. "Ha, what's the matter, Celie? You're all wet. Funny, isn't it? Go, Mom." Chad laughed loudly. At that moment I realized everything had been in vain. A hollow emptiness filled my chest. "I will therefore terminate our contract with your company," I stated firmly. Chad and Barb turned to me, eyes wide with shock. Panic flickered across their faces as they exchanged hushed whispers. Whether they discussed business, emotions, or something else, I didn't care. Only one person remained silent: Mr. Adams. His face had gone pale, his wide eyes filled with unease. I turned to him, my tone unwavering. "First of all, Mr. Adams, I'd like to thank you for your cooperation so far. I imagine the conditions we agreed upon prevented such incidents until now." At my words, Barb shot Mr. Adams a questioning look before glaring at me. Chad, on the other hand, observed his mother's reaction before turning back to me. I continued, my voice steady. "One condition of this matchmaking was that I wouldn't reveal my position until marriage was decided. I wanted to see Chad's true character, not a fabricated one influenced by my title." I pulled out my business card and handed it over. It bore my company's name and my designation. Even those unfamiliar with management would recognize its significance. "Hello again, Mrs. Barb. Thank you for everything so far. This is my position. I have worked with your husband's company for over a decade, and my company is likely one of your biggest clients. I wonder what percentage of your company's revenue we represent." As Chad glanced at the card, his face drained of color. Working at his father's company, he should have immediately realized who I was. Mr. Adams, usually composed, looked flustered. "The transactions are affected? That can't be right," he stammered. His reaction seemed forced, but I remained firm. "Mr. Adams, you had mentioned retiring soon and handing over your responsibilities to your son. Given that, reconsidering future business partners makes sense. Perhaps you hoped this marriage would secure your business ties, but your plan has backfired." A pause followed as my words settled in. "I started my company right after university with some friends. Over 20 years have passed and I've led it as its president ever since. My business relationship with your company has lasted more than a decade, but recently, we've been reconsidering our partnerships." Mr. Adams's unease deepened. "I'm sure you're aware of your company's financial struggles. Contracts are expiring and the company's future is uncertain. This arranged marriage, was it a way to secure stability?" Chad fidgeted uncomfortably, clearly unaware of his company's internal issues. Barb, meanwhile, grabbed her husband's arm, her voice trembling. "What does that mean?" she asked, panic setting in. Mr. Adams wiped the sweat from his brow. I pressed on. "This proposal was never about love. It was about business. But I won't allow myself to be manipulated for financial gain." Barb's hands trembled as she processed my words. The truth had finally been laid bare. Her lips trembled as I spoke. "Mr. Adams' company is struggling with management issues," I said, watching Barb's face twist in discomfort. I continued, "But Barb's company is in even deeper trouble. Once renowned for its quality and efficiency, Mr. Adams' products have now become outdated, allowing competitors to dominate the market. The manufacturing processes are inefficient, cost-cutting measures have failed, and the pricing has become unrealistic. On top of that, employees are under extreme pressure, forced to work under modern labor conditions with shortened deadlines, further damaging the company's reputation." Leaning forward slightly, I added, "Associating with such a company puts any business partner at risk. Even firms with long histories face decline when their structures are outdated and their turnover rates among younger employees remain high. Consequently, Mr. Adams' company has been losing market share, and its overall performance continues to plummet. Given the circumstances, it was only logical for us to seek partnerships with more stable enterprises." A heavy silence filled the room as my words sank in. Both Mr. Adams and Barb began to fully comprehend the gravity of the situation. "How dare you threaten to sever business ties over personal matters? What a disgraceful act. Are you blackmailing us? This is outrageous. Such behavior is completely unacceptable." Barb erupted in anger, though her own actions had led to this. I was taken aback by her accusations. The absence of an apology spoke volumes about her character. Before I could respond, Mr. Adams roared, "Enough. This is entirely your fault." Swallowing my words, I realized that, in truth, Mr. Adams was the one suffering the most from this fallout. His wife's inappropriate behavior had created unforeseen consequences, shattering the stability he had hoped to maintain. Had he simply kept Chad unaware, it might have sufficed, but he should have informed his wife beforehand. I felt relieved that I had dodged the misfortune of welcoming such a person as my mother-in-law. Chad's state was pitiful. His pale face, trembling hands gripping Barb's, painted a sorry picture. Seeing a 48-year-old man clinging to his mother was a pathetic sight. I couldn't help but give him a cold stare. Someone carrying such a cheap-looking bag, claimed to be a president? Moreover, you complained about food waste and acted like you were impoverished. You even lied about being my father's business partner. How disgraceful. Chad accused me vehemently. His attempt to blame me was futile. I have no interest in branded goods. I prefer high-quality domestic leather products. My criticism of wasting excessive food had nothing to do with being poor. It was simply inappropriate behavior. No pretense is needed for such basic decency. As for this bag, it is custom-made from a workshop I frequent. Anyone knowledgeable would instantly recognize its superior quality, but it seems none of you have an eye for fine leather. In fact, this bag is priced higher than commercial brands, I explained. Barb's eyes darted to my shoes and bag, her astonishment evident before she quickly looked away embarrassed. Clearly, those who understood quality could appreciate it. Furthermore, ordering an excessive amount of food only to leave it unfinished is both wasteful and disrespectful to the restaurant. Such behavior is unreasonable and inappropriate. Also, the fact remains, I am your father's business partner. If two company presidents doing business together didn't know each other, what would that imply? Chad, dissatisfied, still appeared unconvinced. Mr. Adams frowned at his son's behavior. When we confirmed our professional relationship, Chad fell silent, looking downward. His reliance on Barb was immature and inappropriate for his age. Witnessing this, I felt nothing but disappointment. If you cut ties with us, our company will be on the brink of bankruptcy. Please forgive us. Mr. Adams pleaded desperately. His admission of the situation finally made Barb realize the severity of the matter. Chad turned ghostly pale, trembling. "Mom," he whimpered, gripping Barb's hand, his distress evident. But Barb was too shocked to respond. Watching them, I let out a deep sigh of relief. From the bottom of my heart, I regretted ever considering a future with someone like Chad. I had naively believed that his honesty meant I could help him improve, but that had been a foolish assumption. I'm sorry," Mr. Adams repeated, yet his apologies lacked any actual proposals to rectify the situation or reflect on their actions. Such meaningless pleas could only lead to emotional severance. Addressing the engagement, I stated, I cannot marry someone whose mother behaves so disgracefully. More importantly, Chad didn't even attempt to stop her. He laughed along instead. Surely you understand why the engagement must be called off. Mr. Adams listened, nodding slightly, acknowledging the inevitability of the decision. Thank you for understanding, I continued. Until yesterday, I believed in Chad's potential for change, which is why I proceeded with the engagement. However, now I feel relieved that this relationship has ended. I then cited specific examples of Chad's behavior. His constant reliance on his mother's opinions, his habit of saying, "Mom said so," and his tendency to use her words as a shield to justify his actions. For a man nearing 50, calling his mother "mommy" so frequently was both absurd and revealing. Once I highlighted these issues, his fragile nature became apparent. He was utterly disheartened. There were countless such examples. Mr. Adams, his mouth slightly agape, seemed astonished. Barb, too, looked embarrassed, though Chad himself remained oblivious to the problem. Regarding the engagement, have I done anything wrong? I asked. Mr. Adams gave a barely perceptible shake of his head, his response feeble. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I prepared for the final blow. I will divorce my wife. Chad will also leave with her. The company's operations will be handed over to competent staff, so please do not abandon us. Help us, Mr. Adams declared, making his decision clear. That's impossible. I can't manage my life without this marriage. Barb cried in shock. Chad and Barb both turned on Mr. Adams, shouting in unison. Why didn't you tell us earlier? I'm innocent. Why am I being thrown out? The problem is with Mom, not me. Their protests disrupted the room, but I had heard enough. Letting out a final sigh, one of both frustration and relief, I said, as you wish. Thank you for your time. I'll be leaving now. Addressing Mr. Adams, I swiftly exited. I had to get my high-quality clothes to the dry cleaners before the champagne stains became permanent. Chad, now silent and teary-eyed, seemed to accept the reality. Barb, however, tried to argue, but a sharp reprimand from Mr. Adams silenced her. Even so, her dissatisfaction was clear in her expression. 5 months after my unpleasant encounter with the Adams family, as I had anticipated, Mr. Adams resigned, not as a mere retirement, but as an acknowledgement of his failures. His downfall had largely resulted from losing our contract. A former employee took over, and the shift away from family management proved beneficial. External evaluations improved, and under the new leadership, innovative product development began yielding positive results. It seemed likely that we would resume business with the company soon. Meanwhile, as expected, Mr. Adams and Barb finalized their divorce. Chad moved in with Barb, but soon rumors of daily conflicts between them spread. Their once close bond had been sustained by financial comfort. After being cut off from his father's company, Chad quickly fell into unemployment. Unable to tolerate his dependency, Barb eventually abandoned him and vanished. I later heard she now lives alone in a shabby apartment, mourning her fate. Once boasting of her extravagant lifestyle, she had alienated everyone around her and was now utterly alone. A year after his retirement, I unexpectedly ran into Mr. Adams during a visit to his former company. I deeply regret the trouble I caused you, he said, offering a genuine apology. He had given Barb half his property, yet her financial ruin stemmed from Chad's incessant demands and her relentless extravagance. Unfortunately, their downfall was of their own making, and sympathy was hard to muster. Mr. Adams had originally planned to distance himself from Chad, but when he realized his nearly 50-year-old son didn't even know how to boil water, he knew it was too late. He reluctantly took him in, and now they lived together, with Mr. Adams managing the household affairs. Chad, having depended entirely on Barb, had never acquired even the most basic life skills. I feel as though I've failed both as a father and a husband, Mr. Adams admitted. This is the consequence of my own actions. Although it's too late to undo everything, I am taking the time to reflect on my mistakes. I even regret some of the choices I made concerning Barb. Thankfully, the company managed to avoid bankruptcy, which brought him a sense of relief. Meanwhile, Chad struggled with even the simplest daily tasks and his part-time job, often breaking down in frustration. Though I hoped he would eventually grow from these experiences, I had no desire to be involved in his life any longer. 3 years have passed since then, and my company has thrived. My performance has steadily improved, and the stock price continues to climb. As for my personal life, I made the firm decision that marriage is no longer something I desire. When I called off my engagement, I explained everything to my parents, and they supported my choice to remain single rather than tie myself to someone like Chad. Now they are even greater advocates of my career. I have fully immersed myself in work while also picking up new hobbies. Though I was once content with indoor activities, I recently took up exercising at the gym. The results are starting to show. Muscle definition, improved confidence, and a renewed sense of self. My subordinates admire my dedication, and I can't deny that it's a gratifying feeling. I've come to understand that happiness isn't something to be found in others but something I must create for myself. I no longer depend on anyone else for my fulfillment. If I ever fall in love again, it would likely be at a stage in life when I can afford to risk everything for it. But that is a concern for another time. For now, my life is full and I am content. What do you do when the person you plan to marry turns out to be entirely wrong for you? When both he and his family make a mockery of your existence? How do you walk away from years of preparation and expectations? Claire's story is one of realization, strength, and, ultimately, liberation. She had built a successful career, valuing her independence over outdated notions of marriage. However, when a business relationship led to a personal one, she found herself involved with Chad, a man who, at first, appeared charming and considerate. Yet as time passed, his condescending remarks and manipulative tendencies emerged. The breaking point came when Claire was publicly humiliated by Chad's mother at a family gathering. Instead of standing by her side, Chad joined in on the mockery. In that moment, Claire recognized that her self-worth mattered more than any relationship. With unwavering resolve, she made the difficult but necessary choice to cut ties. Not only with Chad but also with the business dealings that kept her entangled with his toxic family. Her decision was an act of empowerment, a testament to the fact that self-respect must always take precedence in any relationship. Sometimes the warning signs are too glaring to ignore. Walking away wasn't easy, but it was the right choice. She had invested years into a career she was proud of, and the last thing she needed was to be treated as an afterthought by a man who claimed to love her. Chad's inability to appreciate her professional success, his complete disregard for her dignity, and his mother's cruelty left Claire with no choice. Love should elevate, not diminish, and Chad's actions made it clear that he was unfit to be a partner. As for the business aspect, Claire's decision to sever ties sent a strong and unmistakable message. Integrity and respect come first. This was not just a personal choice, it was a professional one as well. By choosing herself and her business over a toxic environment, Claire emerged stronger than before. Do you think Claire made the right decision by walking away from Chad and the business? How would you handle a situation where your personal life began to negatively impact your professional one? Share your thoughts and experiences with us. Sometimes, the hardest choice is letting go of something that no longer serves us, even when it appears promising on the surface. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your insights in the comments below. Stay tuned for more empowering stories of resilience and self-worth.